how do you explain how we're looking at this whole process?
Um, well, we knew we wanted kids when we first met. Like that was one of the first questions that we asked each other to make sure that we were on the same page when we were dating.
I think it was like the fourth time I met you.
Yeah, well, it's important to have the conversation early on before you waste someone's time. And us both being into health and wellness and trying to be our best selves, bringing in a child into this world, it's like, well, then we have to be at our best and learn as much as we can about raising this kid as healthy and, you know, well balanced as we can, you know, mentally, physically. We had different childhoods that were not perfect. No one has a perfect childhood. Like, we're not expecting to be perfect parents, but we want to do everything in our power to uh, be as self-aware as possible in the things that we're doing, because everything we do as parents, we're influencing our kids. They don't just learn from what we tell them. They're learning from watching us all day, every day. Like,
It's even more.
you can watch what you say, but that is such a minimal impact on your kids. Like, when you wake up, what do you do when you wake up? What do you eat? Like, they're always watching you. So
Yeah.
that's our main concern.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because that's actually when we were talking earlier about I was like, oh, I have a way to start the podcast. That was kind of the um, premise that I wanted to set was that we look at our future parenthood through the lens of we need to act in the way that we want our kids to act and like really emphasizing the leading by example. So trying to set the good habits now, reinforcing ones that we already have. Um, but yeah, like it's unbelievable how many parents I see out there just they don't have their own shit together and you see it in their kids and you see it in their inability to be strong for their kids. Their kids push them over, they tell them what to do, they eat what they want because the parents don't have any discipline. So,
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a part of it, but there's mental health is obviously getting more well known, that like a lot of people deal with mental health issues, but like I don't know if this just being in 2024, but there's like a lot of kids that have anxiety and mental health issues, and
yeah,
I can't help but think about the influence that the parents have on that. Not to say that like if you do everything perfect, your kid's not going to have any mental health issues, but
right.
I think that the way we raise our kids, the attachment styles. I'm doing a lot of research on like the first 3 years of life are like the most crucial to like their entire life and their development. Yeah, I just want to make a conscious effort to do everything I can to like set them up for success.
It seems like from what I've gathered from you, and I've listened to a few people too, that the first 3 years really sets the stage for their like emotional temperament and their ability to cope with emotions and their the the degree to which they're likely to feel anxious or not based on what their experience was like in those first 3 years. It seems like that's the real catch early on, rather than the behavioral stuff in terms of like discipline and learning to deal with your own emotions and that stuff. It seems like they're relying on you more in that first period for all of their emotional regulation. And so dialing that in, like you said, seems to be pretty important in terms of setting them up long term.
Yeah, from what I've watched and read and everything, it's like when the baby is first born, like they have no way of dealing with any of their discomforts. You are 100% their way of dealing with that and surviving. So you being there constantly is important to reassure them. And and we all have this like uh reaction when we're nervous or we're anxious, where our, you know, our sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight kind of kicks in. We can get anxious, and it build that up in our body, right? So if you're there for this baby 100% of the time and you can reassure them, that nervous system is not on all the time.
Right.
Obviously we need that, but they should not be anxious and nervous if you're going to help them or not, especially in those early times, right? And as they get older and they get a little bit more independent, that's when is actually really important for the father to play a role in helping them become more independent and explore and be a little bit more risk taker.
Mhm.
um, and that's kind of how you move away from just a pure supportive role
Yeah.
in their life. So
Yeah, so far from what I can see and what I've learned, there's kind of two benchmarks in the first few years that I can see where there's major transition points. And the first one is about 8 months to a year. Obviously, all this stuff is going to depend on the individual child, right? Because we're going to mature at different rates. But it seems like that 8, 10 month, 12-month period where you shift from the baby's always right to now we have to start negotiating boundaries, right? So when you have an infant, it's like every time that baby cries, you address it. This whole like let them cry it out thing, it seems like that's not the way to go in that first year or so. They're helpless.
well, they're
They
crying for a reason because they have no other way of
Yeah,
communicating. And basically, when they start to become like almost a year old, they can do you know, hand signs. You can kind of communicate, maybe not verbally yet,
right.
but like you can still, they understand what you're saying. Like they've started to learn your language and what you say, right? And you can communicate them with, when they're a newborn, you can't communicate with them,
Right.
right, as much or at all.
Yeah, it seems like at that point you can start to add a little bit of autonomy, but it's still pretty tempered for a while. You're still like everything major, you're still the source of comfort, and then as you hit like 2.5, 3 is when you really start to turn the jets on like, okay, now I'm starting to treat you like a person, and you're really going to start to have more demarcated boundaries in terms of discipline and expectations. And from what I can see, I think this is where a lot of people are going wrong. Now, I'm tempering this whole conversation with we have not had kids yet. I've, been proxy to people who have kids, so I have outside view on the situation, and we, study human behavior and stuff, psychology all the time. So that's where our information is coming from, not personal experience. So that's always the caveat. But um, I think a lot of people don't have high enough expectations for their children, and they don't have the discipline to be patient to let their kids develop at the maximal rate. And so you're familiar with this, but the idea of the zone of proximal development, right, which is the optimal challenge for you to be for you to learn. So you're just enough outside your comfort zone that it's maximally interesting, but it's not so far out of your comfort zone that you're overwhelmed. And so when you look at people in general, if you learn to watch people, listen to what they say, and read between the lines, you can learn a lot about people by watching them. And I think we have this idea that we need to know everything first, and then we teach it to other people top down. This is even something that we're dealing with getting into health coaching, which is this idea of like most of the answers are inside the person that you're working with, not in your head. Your knowledge comes in periodically to fill in the gaps where maybe their knowledge is lacking, but the way forward has to be determined by them. It's their life. They're always going to have the most wisdom about their life. And it's also just have the humility to understand like you might think something is good for someone, but that doesn't make it so. I don't know all the lore behind this concept of the law of unintended consequences, but I know it's a mistake we make a lot of fucking times as people is that we assume because our intentions are good and because we think our plan is good that it's going to work. And so bringing this back to children is like if you watch them, they will tell you how they need to develop. If you just watch when they're engaged, just leave them alone. Be there to keep them safe, but let them engage with the world around them. They will just take off. It's so cool to watch kids learn.
So where do you think people go wrong with that transition point where they're kind of getting more independent?
Sorry, thank you for keeping me back on track. We have a hard time separating our emotions from what's best for other people, the world around us, sometimes actually even ourselves. And so you'll see a kid climbing something and you'll get anxious and you'll get impatient. And so you want to go help them. But you really have to kind of take a minute to say, is this child in serious danger? Like, you have to know what the level of risk is that's appropriate because at a certain age, falling down and scraping your elbow is acceptable.
It's part of a learning process. I mean, you want to
Yeah.
avoid injury as much as possible,
Right.
but like, yeah,
You don't want head trauma.
and scrapes and
You want to avoid major fractures. Impalement is probably a good one to avoid. Yeah, sharp
you
objects.
don't want blood.
Yeah, ideally. But like if a kid is climbing something and the worst thing that's gonna happen, I mean, when you're, 2.5, 3 years old, you're light. So you fall, you bump your head, whatever, like you're gonna be fine. You're falling off a little, box this big. And so it's like you see that the kid might fall and you go help him. But now you've intervened in that process of the child learning to problem solve.
Or you see them climbing and you take them down.
Oh yeah, or that.
No, don't climb on that. Okay, there's certain things you don't climb, but let's say you're at a park or
Yeah.
something and there is things to climb and you're holding their hand or you're there like oh, I'm gonna catch you.
Yeah.
They know that you're always there for them and they're not going to be willing to take a little bit more of a risk, but also understand that they are taking a risk and that if they fall, that's on them, not my parents are always going to be there to
Right.
catch me in everything, like physically and mentally, like through things that they're going through, right?
Yeah, so two things there you pointed out super important. One, they're not understanding that they're taking responsibility for themselves because you're there too long. And I mean that over the course of their development. Like once they hit that 2.5, 3, that's like what we're saying. They start to learn that they're responsible for themselves. So that's one. And when you do that, like if your kids are climbing the playground, let's say, and you're standing behind them, oh, it's okay, baby, I got you, I got you. Like you're teaching them that they should be afraid. So you're undermining their confidence before they can even develop it. You're teaching them that the world is scary, and if I'm not here to support you, you're going to fail. And that's a very deep thing to implant into your children. We were talking about this because I was at the park with my nephew recently, and I thought about this specifically. He was climbing something, and I'm standing behind him. I'm fully capable of catching him if anything happens. But what I'm not doing is standing there going, "Oh, it's okay, buddy. You got the like." I'm standing there, and he looks back because this is what kids do, right? They go a little bit out of their comfort zone, and they look back to you to see what your reaction is. and they're looking to see how they should feel about the situation. And as soon anytime he would look back, I just go, "You got this, buddy. That's it. No fear in my body language. No, oh my God, I'm gonna catch you when you fall. Just obviously, I'm ready to catch him because it's,
Because you have to
it's
take care
easy
of
to do. I'm standing right behind him. I can
him.
lift my hands up and catch him when he falls. But what I'm not doing is showing him with my body language and my tone of voice that he should be afraid. He should be careful, but he's honestly at the age where he's kind of learning that anyways. Like, I think he's had enough bumps now where he's starting to learn that he actually needs to pay attention to what he's doing. He's not just like, I remember like maybe 3, 4 months ago, we were at the park with him, and you could tell he was just like completely reckless, like climb as high as he wants, not pay attention to holding on because he was just used to being, you know, help. And then now he's learning as he gets out in the world that he's responsible for himself. So he's like, he's paying attention now. But yeah, I think that spending more time thinking about what are the implicit things that we're teaching children as we interact with them as they age. It's very easy to talk about, like you said earlier, to say things to your children, but really diving into what is the child going to internalize about what just happened. Um, and that's like every micro moment with your children. And I think right now we're in a crisis of unconfident, irresponsible, insecure, neurotic children. And when I say children, I mean 25 and under, because I was one of them. And this idea of like all these basic premises that we used to live off of, even when I grew up, they were still kind of there on their tail end. Like, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? That was like the foundation of don't be a pussy. Like, people can call you names, so what? Right? They're words. Physical violence is a different thing, but words are words. That's up to you if you want to be upset by them. And these like underlying values of like, you're tough and you can handle the world. We've lost that. Now we're teaching kids the world's too scary. And if you don't have us grown-ups around to take care of you, you're screwed. So what happens when they grow up and they don't have parents around? They don't grow up because now we're all 30, 35 years old, still living in our parents' basements because we complain about house prices, which is like, okay, objectively, the house prices are more expensive than they used to be. So what? Grow up and figure it out, right? Like, we're not the first generation in the world to have problems. Like, okay, things are expensive, but we're not getting bombed on. We're not getting thrown into concentration camps. We can figure it out. And like, a lot of this is emotional for me because I think this is something that, at least for myself, I've really internalized in the last year and a half of starting the business and trying to really like shake off the mental shackles of not being responsible for my own life and all those childish behaviors and thought patterns I had that were stopping me from ultimately taking responsibility and doing the things that need to be done. And there's nothing better than having a child on the way to, you know,
You're not
make you feel
only
like being a loser dad.
you're not only responsible for yourself now, you're responsible for another person,
Mhm.
and instilling good values in them so that they grow up and they also can take care of themselves
Right.
and be responsible.
A lot of what we were just discussing was a lot of that I think comes down to the role of the father, right? The encouragement to go out in the world and be confident and be competent and all that stuff. It's not that the mother's not involved in that. But what do you think specifically, how do you see your role as kids grow up?
Yeah, I honestly don't think I've given it that much thought that far away. Obviously, because I've never given birth before, so that's kind of my number one thought.
That's a lot hard to think past.
Actually, I would say most people, especially probably first time moms, don't even think past labor and birth, right? And the fact that I'm even like doing research on like, okay, I need to know how to take care of a newborn, and I need to like know, you know, everything that they're gonna need in the first year at least. I should know that before we have the baby. So, um, yeah, I'm really focused on being supportive, and I'm foreseeing it being hard because I can see other mothers uh also experience it when their kids are becoming more independent and now they have to step back, and that's probably hard, right?
Right.
It's our nature to be more nurturing and supportive and like want to, you know, soothe them if they fall down and they're crying. It's like you want to just be there for them, but like you kind of have to step back. And at least with me right now, I'm more conscious that I'm going to have to do that. So, obviously, being as supportive and nurturing at the beginning and just making sure that throughout their development, I'm there and they know that I'm there, but that we've helped them develop their own um, sense of self and responsibility and pride in what they can do rather than always coming back to get validation. Because I feel like that's something that I had growing up or needed growing up is always validate, like being validated
Right.
for everything that I did. And even just like, you know, if I draw a picture or I did a project or, you know, I had a karate tournament or something, like I would always be like looking back at my parents and be like, did I do okay? Like, are you happy with me? Are you proud of me? And it's like, I want them to be proud of themselves. And we will be there to support them through whatever they do. But, like, number one, I want them to have that internal validation. Because that, I think that really sets you up for success mentally um, later on in your life, right? Like, not relying on other people to,
Right.
yeah.
How do you how do you think we instill that in kids?
Well, we talked about this a little bit before. Um, how they did a study, right? Where they were, I don't know, you can probably explain it better. What the feedback they gave the
Yeah,
kids
right.
when they, what was it?
Whether they got praise for their skill or they got praise for their hard work,
Mhm.
um, predicted their future um, their future success. So if you praise kids on their skill, so let's say Jimmy plays basketball and you say, "Wow, you're so good at basketball. You scored 40 points today. Like you're amazing." They're actually less likely to do better in the future. To whereas if you're emphasizing their hard work and their effort, um, they're more likely to be successful in the future. I want to actually look into it because I just saw the clip about it. I didn't actually look into like how they set up the study or anything, but it's a detail that I you wouldn't necessarily think about until someone tells you, like, because you just think, oh, make sure you're praising your kids when they do well, but you wouldn't necessarily think that how you praise them would be that impactful, right? It's kind of strange because as the way you laid that out is like there is this point, and I think this is true. There is this point where, as a mother, you've taken care of your primary role as the caregiver early on because you're like most important early on by, magnitudes. And then there's kind of a point where like the best thing to do for the child is kind of just like slip into the background for a little bit, right? Because I think it's extremely wise to understand that you're going to hit a point where your good intentions are going to be the wrong thing to do. That's very hard for most people to actually not comprehend, but actually believe in and say, "Oh, like this is I'm going to get to a point where me trying to be as compassionate as I feel I should be is going to be the wrong move." And so I need to learn, I need to be prepared for the day where I'm going to feel a visceral pull to help my child, and I need to tell myself to not do that.
You would do it in a uh graduated way. You wouldn't be like one day, okay, well,
Yeah.
you're on your own, kid, like, good luck. And they're just like crying because they don't know what to do. It's like, no, like, you would be stepping back, like, gradually and letting them do more and more and more things as they, if they're trying something and it's not going to hurt them, just let them explore,
Mhm.
let them figure it out. Because oftentimes, like, they've watched you or they just figure it out a different way, like that's how I think that's how our brains really develop is like when you're a kid, like everything is so malleable in your brain that like you can do something a completely different way, where like if I sat down and I was doing the same activity, I would be like, no, you do it this way because like that's how I was raised and that's how I do it now. But it's like I want my kids to like really uh develop their creativity and like use their brain in different ways.
Yeah, and for that to be encouraged and not looked at as an inconvenience.
It just because it takes them a little bit longer to figure out a different way
Right.
doesn't mean that it's not uh good for them or it's not an efficient way. Like
Yeah, it really doesn't matter that much if they put the square block into the square hole when they're
if they can
two.
put the square
Yeah.
block in a bigger square hole, like I don't know, like
Yeah.
yeah,
Who's to say
it
that
would be
that's wrong? We don't even know what they're trying to do,
yeah.
right? Like, there are definitely ways where, as a parent, you need to impose what the child should and shouldn't be doing, but not during play.
Even in activities aren't considered play per se. Like, if you're putting on your jacket and they're trying to get their zipper up, like
Sure.
that's a form of them just like,
Right.
well, how do I put this side in the other zipper? And like, maybe they'll be like, hey, you do it. And it's like, well, no, you try.
Yeah.
And you encourage them to try things, right? As long as you're there for support, where this is the secure attachment, right? As they're growing, as they're developing, you're there for support, but you're encouraging them little by little to do a little bit more.
Right.
And then they get comfortable and they're like, oh, I actually can do this on my own. I don't need to go, hey, I need your help, I need your help every single time.
Yeah, I actually think of those scenarios as play too. Like, I think that's something that people miss from their lives is like, this is something that I think sometimes I annoy you with, but like, I'm playful all the time. Like, the world is there's enough places in the world to be serious that when I don't have to be, I'm gonna be playful. Um, I think it's one of the most important things. It's so good for you, um, emotionally and neurologically. That's how we learn. We learn through play, right? Play is having the spirit of play is, I think, like, play and discipline are two very important concepts for people in general. But if you can instill those in kids early on, play is
I think
if you
it's I think it's not having an expectation.
yeah, that's it. That's it. Actually, that's why those are perfect because play is in scenarios where the expectation is not important. You can explore laterally all of the possibilities that the world has to offer. Like you said, if you're zipping up your jacket and we're not in a rush, I, I don't know if you want to try to do it with your feet. I don't care. Use your teeth, whatever. Like, it's your world. There's no, if we're in a rush, now there's an expectation. And so now we have to do it this way. And the reason I bring in discipline is because discipline is doing things you don't want to do, but you have to do.
Yeah, and having an expectation of you
And having that,
needing to do
exactly.
it.
There is an expectation. And so you want to teach your kids, you meet expectations and exceed them. And knowing that difference between this is play and this is where there's expectations is super important. And this just like pops in my head. I think that a lot of us are stressed because we don't make those demarcations in our day-to-day life. We get stuck in the expectations even when they're not necessary. So we're burnt out all the time. We're not even meeting the expectations that we really should because we've wasted so much energy throughout the day on, oh my God, I gotta get the dishes done right now. And it's like, yeah, or you can just do them and have fun. And if you splash a little water on the floor, life's gonna go on, you know? But we go, oh, spill water on the floor, and then you get frustrated and you clean it up and you're pissed off because, I made some joke and it distracted you, and then you spilled, and then now you're pissed off. It's like we get caught in these things where we take things seriously that we shouldn't, and we use all that energy that we could have used to actually meet expectations that we're supposed to. And the way I look at it is like play is recharging, and the the discipline expectation route is where you use a lot of your energy. And so the more that you can add play throughout the day, the more energy you have to hold yourself to your expectations. And I think that's another example of that yin yang style balance that we need in our life, right? You want to have that. It's not about one better than the other. It's about the right context.
Yeah, like for kids, it's very obvious what play is because they're discovering everything, right? But like as you age and, you know, as you're an adult, the only play really we think about is like physical activity, I guess, like sports and but there's so many different things that we can get into, like creative hobbies or, learning a new skill, is really important. And to have like set time away from like we could do a whole new like whole another podcast on play. Well, this
Mhm.
kind of turned into a lot of play, but how it's so important for the balance to be disciplined, like you were saying, like knowing when to be disciplined and knowing when it's time to play and have fun and be more lighthearted and,
Mhm.
and let mistakes happen because that's important.
Mhm. Yeah, our shame becomes more solidified as we're older, and we get less comfortable with failure.
Mhm.
And so we we become more self-conscious. Yet we don't let ourselves fail. We're too embarrassed by failure as we get older. I think that's why people don't do new things when they're older. I think it's the biggest thing stopping people is they're afraid of absolutely sucking at something again. And also, like, I like that you drew that distinction where it's like, as a kid, you're all play and no discipline. And then what happens is the world beats the play out of you. And so you think that everything is about discipline. And that's also a failure, I think, of the adults in the world is we don't know when to teach kids it's okay to play now and it's not okay to play now.
I
And
also,
we always, sorry, I just finished this thought. We always reward kids for discipline even though the discipline sucks. But like when they work hard, well, great job on your tests, all this stuff. But we never reward them for play and creativity. And so then we end up as adults and we feel guilty anytime we do anything that's just for the hell of it because we've been taught our whole lives there's nothing valuable in that and there's only value in getting your stuff done. And so we're burnt out. We're just on this flat line through life because we don't know how to turn it on and off. And like I was explaining with that, if you recharge with play, your discipline, your output is way higher because we don't have that balance. We're just at a low level, unproductive guilt train of not doing anything that well and but feeling guilty about doing any of the things that would help recharge us.
yeah, actually, well, I had a thought while you're talking, and I think that's a result of the school system. Because the way I went through the school system, it was like, okay, when you're really little, like you just do a lot of play, right, and exploring, and then as you go up in grades, it's like you're sitting at a desk and you're just doing your assignments or your work or your reading or whatever. And you do that every grade, it's more sitting and more assignments and more like it's just more discipline completely. Like sure you have gym class or whatnot, but like it
So something popped into my head when you were talking about that is this idea to have the freedom to explore. There's also something that, depending on the maturity level of the child or the adult, there's going to be an optimal boundary that you can put on play that allows you to get the most out of it. And so, you know how I use the example of how children, they don't know how to abstract. So if you tell a kid to clean their room, they just throw a temper tantrum and you think they're misbehaving. And it's not actually they're misbehaving, it's that clean your room contains too much information for them to understand. Whereas if you say, "Hey Jimmy, can you take this teddy bear and put it on that shelf?" They go, "Oh yeah." And they run over and they do it and they get all excited because they love interacting with you and they knew how to do it. They You gave them responsibility and they crushed it. And then you can say, "Great job." And then, after months and months and months, they can now understand that putting my toys on the shelf and putting my clothes in here, that's what clean your room means. What we don't do well as kids are growing up is maintain those boundaries at the right level. So it popped in my head because you were talking about school, and I was thinking of like arts and crafts for kids, right? Like that's about as close as you get to like play for kids um, in the education setting. You play games and stuff during class. I guess elementary school is like a lot of teachers are good at actually adding play in. But let's say you take something like this, where at a certain age, if you just tell the kids, okay, go over there. There's glue, there's construction paper, there's styrofoam things, there's whatever the
Cleaners.
pipe cleaners, there's cotton balls, there's gumdrops, and there's sprinkles, and there's crayons, and go make something. There's going to be a lot of kids that do nothing. They're going to take the piece of construction paper and they're going to draw on it because that's what they know, and all that other stuff. It's too many options for their brain to formulate a plan. But if you do what happens a lot in school, where they say, okay, we're going to learn how to make a snowflake, but you know how you fold it up and then you just cut triangles out of it and it turns out, but you can cut wherever you want. So it's like, that's a nice degree of where the kid's like, oh, I can make the snowflake look how I want, but it's in the structure of there's a process to how we do this. And there's always going to be an optimal range that you can keep kids in that will bring them into that proximal zone of development. So we've taken a lot of the excess out and let them play within this range of comfortability where they can explore but not be overwhelmed. I think that's something that,
It's interesting because I thought when you were first explaining that with all the different arts and crafts supplies that you would encourage them to just try something. Like let them explore and see what they come up with. And I think depending on their age and
right,
what I guess what they have done before, they'd be able to use their mind and go, okay, I'm gonna do what I did before, or I'm going to come up with this new thing, this new idea.
right,
And that's one of the things I'm most excited about, I think. Like watching our son grow up. Um, like just learning things and just like trying things. Because like I feel like I don't know, I don't think I did that enough growing up. I'm not a creative person. I'm a way more logical person and like I like following steps and rules. And it's like I want to see our kids just be more open to trying things, be more creative.
yeah,
I want to encourage that.
yeah. There's a raw enthusiasm that comes from people who learn to be creative and like people that enjoy problem solving, and the the idea of not knowing the answer yet is exciting. Like those are the best people, right? Like everybody who we like, who we follow online, who you like in person, if you think about it, probably the character trait. Are you thirsty, buddy? Yeah, the character trait that people like that's the most common across awesome people is that they do not require the circumstances to be ideal for them to have fun or be okay or be positive or, you know, like they love the idea of, all right, let's see what happens. Let's see if we can figure this out. And so what you talk about with kids is like encouraging that curiosity is it's so good for them. Because not just good for their brain, but people will like them later. Like if you teach your kids, you don't need the world to be perfect to be all right. They're set. They can go anywhere. There's no situation that they can't go into and go, all right, let's see what's happening.
Well, and I think too, like we were talking about responsibility and developing that. And I think that goes hand in hand with being creative because how do you come up with new solutions and how do you look at things in your own view rather than the way other people would think about things? You have to be creative.
Right.
And so I think that in like establishing that creativity early on and instilling discipline and responsibility, like that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, if you don't feel responsible to come to the conclusion, then you won't stimulate the creative part of your brain. You just go, ah, someone else will do it.
Yeah.
But if you feel like, oh no, no, I gotta figure this out, which is that goes into like that's like a baseline leadership quality, which is fantastic, which is like, no, no, I'm responsible, I'm involved, I have a say in this, I can help, let's figure it out. Well, we gotta go. I would like to keep talking about this, actually.
It's a very interesting topic because, like I kind of said earlier, like you would think first time parents are not concerned about like, oh, how do we raise our, kid that's like a kid into like teenage into an
Right.
adult. Like, why are we thinking about that this early? Like, we should just be thinking about the newborn stage. And I'm actually not concerned about the newborn stage because it's pretty predictable. Like,
Mm.
they need to be fed, they need to be changed, they need to be comforted, they need you. But like outside of that, there's so much more in their development that I want to be like knowledgeable on and like really think about how we're going to influence our kids growing up. So,
Yeah, exactly. You have to have a plan ahead of time. You can't just wait
yeah,
and
it's
oh,
be
we're
heartbreaking.
here now. What do we do? Like you wanna
Well, and it's not always going to go to plan, but at least having the knowledge of like this is the idea, this is the standard that we're going to hold ourselves to, and
Right.
this is what we're going to try to do. And obviously, life changes, but and you learn things along the way. Like maybe some of the things that we do aren't going to work out, but we're willing to be open and flexible and continue learning too. We're not just doing all this learning now and then like the baby's here. It's like okay, now we just
Right.
figure it out. Like we'll be constantly consuming more information. I always encourage people to not just be to just be more open-minded and always um, willing to incorporate new knowledge. I think that's really important. So yeah, that's how we're becoming new parents.
Yeah. I want to do another one on this. I think we need to follow up at some point. I feel like we went on a lot of tangents. By we, I mean me. Um, and there's a lot more juice to be squeezed out of this conversation because we didn't really talk too much specifics about like what we're actually doing as parents. Um, this came out as more of what our philosophies are on parenthood. Um, but I think it would be interesting to dive a little bit more into details, and maybe we'll prepare and we'll actually have something more concrete than just our opinions on why we're doing what we're doing for parenthood in terms of like you're going the midwife route and things like
Yeah,
cloth diapers
we
and
didn't even talk about, younger. I did not really foresee this podcast going in that direction, like where, our whole philosophy on parenting. I really thought we were going to talk about like, under a year old kind of thing, but
it's me. You're talking to me, so
all right, we'll do another one.
okay.